recording. Happy Bowtie Friday. I'm here with Adam, and we've been working on lots of Nifty Ink stuff, and he did a cool graph tutorial. So basically, what we do, we built Nifty Ink with Scaffold-ETH, right? So we started with Scaffold-ETH, we built Nifty Ink, which is an NFT platform, and then we added the graph into Nifty Ink to make it easier to query data. Is that right?
Yes, pretty much. So we started out just like pure Scaffold-ETH, going on chain, looking at events, going on chain loads and loads of times to get inks out. We kind of built it so it worked. Then it was getting kind of gnarly, trying to get data
Parsing
out.
Events, right?
Yeah. And so obviously one place to go. So we thought we'd implement the graph or rather a subgraph to make it just so much easier to get data out.
And just to like talk about the old method, basically a contract can trigger an event and that can be read off chain. Contracts can't read events, but they can write events. So it's like a cheap way to store stuff on chain that contracts can't trigger off of. But then you as the end user, you as the developer have to go through the chain listening for all the events from all the contracts. And then you have to take all that data and kind of look through it and be like, okay, like let's say we're setting an owner of whether they're true or false. Instead of getting the final state, you basically have to look through all these different quests or all these different bit flips of, yes, now they're the owner, now they're not the owner, now they're the owner, looking through all the events, looking for the last one, and yes, they are the owner, right? So it's a ton of like data you have to crawl through to figure out what that final result is, or to put together a final list that you have to like have different values of to package it all up, right? And that's where the graph comes in and we can query it with a nice query and get data straight back. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty much. And it, it just meant that when we were like, oh, we've got Xstar and then we've tamainnet, so now we've got to be pinging two chains all the time, and you're just polling all the time to get all this information, and like
so much polling.
Page loads are taking a while, which and obviously is bad for user experience. And we thought, okay, let's do it right. And so that's what we did here.
So the graph is kind of like this middle layer that's a server itself, and it's listening to all our events, it's packaging them up, and then we can query from that with simple like API requests, sort of.
Yeah, pretty much. You basically, like, if you've implemented events, then you're in luck. Like if you basically fired off an event every time anything happens in your contract. We did have one thing where we hadn't done that for one of our functions, so that was then a little bit more intricate because we had to look at the call data. So you can also look at the function calls as well as the events that are fired off. But I mean, every day,
like literally parsing call data through every transaction, trying to find like a specific function signature and then whatever went along with it. Good Lord.
Pretty much. So it's I mean, it works well, and we got it going in the end. But if you're not worried about gas costs, fire events all the time, you won't regret it.
Awesome. You won't regret it. All right, let me share my screen and we'll kind of go through what you've put up here. Cool, awesome. So you wrote this article and I would recommend someone read it, but we're gonna jump straight to this, right? Which is the directions. And that is just a fork of Nifty Ink, right? You did a fork of Nifty Ink, or I'm sorry, a fork of Scaffold-ETH that will talk to the graph. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty much. So this is just took Scaffold-ETH, and actually for the purpose of this, like we're just looking at like how we can pull graph data in, and also how we can deploy a sort of subgraph. So we'll talk a bit more about that in a second. But so we added a couple of modules, but then we also like stripped out, but like took out some of the stuff that we don't need for this specific purpose, like an account and that kind of stuff. We're literally just saying, okay, how, like if I've got a contract that I'm interested in, how can I like normalize the data or aggregate it in a way so I can then create charts and create like rankings.
Query it and get real data back that like you actually want to use.
Yeah,
got it.
Exactly.
Okay, so first step, I cloned it. So I already did this because it takes some time. I cloned down, basically you're cloning down Scaffold-ETH, but you're grabbing the graph dev branch and we're putting it into the graph dev folder. Then you jump into that folder and you yarn install, and it takes a minute or 2 or 3. But now we have it installed. So I've already done that step. Oh, Docker. I had to install Docker. Just go to Docker, right? Docker.com, go. Cool. But eventually it installs like this. And what that is like a containerization service where you can have a deterministic container that spins up that has a whole bunch of stuff, like configuration and stuff for you without you having to set up like a custom server. Is that a good way to put it? And the graph requires it, right? Like there isn't like a easy way to do this without bringing up Docker.
Yes. Also, yes. This is so. The way I guess the graph works is that we've obviously got the blockchain, whichever one we're interested in. So we're looking at XDAI here, and so we've got XDAI. We've got an XDAI sort of node that we'd look at, but the graph basically also runs on nodes. So graph nodes basically are sat there, and you create a subgraph, and it then sort of indexes the data that it sees coming off the relevant blockchain that you've sort of pointed it at, and so we needed a graph node somewhere. Like you could go straight and deploy it, like test it in production and go straight to the hosted version. We thought it'd be cool here to run on a sort of local node, and yeah, running the Docker container is pretty much the easiest way to do that, because you just really need Docker installed, but then you just need a configuration file that says I'd like to look at the XDAI chain, and so that's an easy thing to add into Scaffold-ETH. Yeah, I don't know if you want to like pull up the.
Cool. Yeah. Do you want me? Yeah, you tell me. Where are we going here?
Yeah, so go up there, just the top bit, just the Docker.
Oh, okay.
There. So yeah, so if you jump in, it's pretty much the Docker compose YAML file.
Got it. Yep.
So here, like this is pretty much
Start with
vanilla.
that image. Yep.
The only thing I've changed from the one from the sort of repo, the graph node repo is this line here to say, because I think it defaults to looking at a local chain. So I've changed.
Oh, like localhost 8545 or something like that. Okay.
Yeah, pretty much.
So this guy is the one that's listening for the events and storing things together, and it's queryable. It's basically emulating their servers, what their production servers would do, but it's local, and we can kind of point the bat signal at any chain and listen to events with this guy. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we want to do is we get into that folder and we do a Docker compose up, which is going to stand up a container that's kind of defined in this manifest, right? It uses the graph node image. So it starts with, they probably started with some like Ubuntu image, and then it installed a bunch of Node and all of their stuff, and then we can just grab their image and run with it. That's kind of how Docker works, I think.
Yeah, so you can kind of see the stuff that we've got in here. So like we've got Postgres, just a sort of local database, but then you're also running like an IPFS node. So the graph, like everything is stored in IPFS, and you'll see that in production.
And we might need to do this with Scaffold-ETH. It would be so cool for one node, and it's like a block explorer and all the cool things that you could have. Once you've got them bringing up a container, you could have like a full ETH node, or like a light sync node running. Sorry, I interrupted you. I was just getting excited about Scaffold-ETH.
No, for sure. It's like it's a really nice pattern, because I mean now we're like we're basically up and running, right? Like this little dude is syncing, is going.
Oh, so there's some syncing that has to happen. We're listening to these are the latest blocks on Blockscout, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So if we see them, where are we at? Yeah. So you can see.
So this was 14 seconds ago. Cool. So, so we're seeing, we're seeing a new block show up here, and this guy will be like, yep, I see the new block. Okay, cool. Neat. What do we need to do next? Now that, so basically we've spun up a container that's listening to XDAI, specifically listening to our contract.
So it's not looking
not
at
there,
our
not there.
So
okay, just talking to the chain. Perfect. Okay, then we need to fire up our front end. So if you're familiar with Scaffold-ETH, there is I think we need to be in that folder, right? The graph dev folder. Yep. And then we do a yarn start. And this will fire up our React app. And then I can hear my cat snoring over there. Hopefully that's not recorded too bad. And we're going to see what? Oh yeah, so our front end should come up and tell us that it's not fetching anything because we need to create our subgraph, right?
Yeah, pretty much. So yes, this is just like front end, and like I don't know if you want to. Well, I guess we'll wait.
We're waiting. Yeah, we're waiting for React. Let's see. So if we get into the React app, I can see what you've written here. Let's see.
Yeah, so it's pretty much, and I guess we'll see it. So The key thing, so for interacting with GraphQL, like you basically rely on Apollo. Apollo gives you that client that lets you essentially like send GraphQL queries to wherever you want to. So
Ooh, we should pull up a little bit. So like
yeah.
GraphQL is long, like before Ethereum. That was a way of like, it was like an API. It was kind of like REST, right? It's a way to query for just the data you want within an API call. Is that right?
Yeah, it's like a really it's a really interesting pattern where you basically can specify like fragments that you're interested in, and it only returns to you those fragments. So you kind of, it takes a little bit of like getting your head around, and you're like maybe sending you basically send JSON to the endpoint, and it sends you back what you want.
And
so
you're telling it like the shape that you want it. Like I'd like all the users, but I'd like to know just their profile picture and how many times they viewed the front page or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And it takes a bit again your head around, but then it's actually really nice because you sort of have one endpoint for everything, and you just change the structure of the query to get different stuff back.
And you have some predefined schema of what your data looks like, probably. So then that can be kind of selected. You can pick and choose the bits in there.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's see. So I should just follow the instructions. What am I doing here? Okay, so they say check out, you wrote this, go to ABI, let's see.
Well, yeah, so if you go to the app
Subgraph, here we go.
Yeah,
so here's our ABI.
Here.
Here.
So this is spun up now. So like so what we've got here, we've got these two tabs. So one is, this is going to be some data soon once we've got our subgraphs. And then the GraphQL, like this is basically like kind of an explorer, which will like, once we've got a subgraph, once we've got a schema to look at, you'll be able to see everything there, explore a bit, write custom queries against it. So that's sort of where we're going towards.
And you're trying to, so I as a new developer, I'll put my ABIs in here, and then I will, we're going to set up each one of these. Okay, cool. Starting with the schema. Okay, yeah, let's look at the schema.
Yeah, so you're sort of, your ABIs, you kind of like, you basically get them from your contract compilation, obviously, and you can just sort of dump them in. So I put in like the Nifty Ink.json file, and then the first thing you want to do is kind of define the schema. So it's like a really light, it was actually pretty much the first thing we added to the Nifty Ink graph, is that, okay, we want to track all the inks that artists create, and then we want to track some information about the artists themselves. So you can see we basically created these two types. So there's a type which is an ink, there's a type which is an artist, and then we also want to track a total, so the total number of inks and new artists every day. And so then you basically just need to define the information that you want to have on each of those types of objects. And the really cool thing is that you like, just in defining the schema, you can refer to other objects. So you can see like the artist on the ink is like the type of data is artist.
Is
so
this artist down here? Yep.
This type of entity. And that, like, the really cool thing here is that like this derived from thing.
Just all going to happen under the hood for us.
Yeah. So this, like,
awesome.
Like we basically want to say, okay, the inks as like an array, and it knows to look in the sort of ink object and use the artist field to basically populate this array. So we don't really need to worry about that at all. That mapping sort of happens automatically as soon if we create the ink with the artist ID.
Wow, that's
so
cool.
It's like it's a really nice simple pattern, but like
you're not just setting up kind of the storage schema, but the connections of the data and how like they, like when you query for this piece, it's going to query for something else, and there's kind of like this chain that you could create here or something.
Yeah, and like stuff like when I started out, I was like, oh, this is going to be a real pain to try and like link these two things together. I need to remember to do this and that, but then obviously you get out of the box, and that is an absolute delight.
Awesome. Okay, so we've got our schema set up, and it looks like we need to generate something. So using this schema, something needs to generate. Is that right?
Yeah. So if you go to so if you go to the subgraph, you're in the node. Yeah, you need to go back.
There we go. So cool. So PWD there. We're packages subgraph. Okay, and then this guy.
Yeah, so if you use this, there are basically like 3 steps, I guess, to deploying a subgraph, and it's one of them which basically takes the ABIs and it takes the schema, and it creates a bunch of sort of generated files, and those generated files you can then And so yeah, you can see this new folder has actually just been like created there. These generated files you can then use in your mappings. Which I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, but the next thing,
that's next.
This sort of mapping, this mapping stage where it says, okay, you know about all the events that your contract's going to emit. When you see those events, like what do you do?
Okay, and that's this file here, right? So we've set up our schema. Well, basically, we brought in the ABI for Nifty Ink. We set up our schema, and now we're looking at these mappings, basically. And our schema, by the way, is like referential, right? So we've already kind of set up not just the storage, but like the links to things. But I'm guessing there's some more links here, or this is more like handlers. This is the handlers for how to handle the data when it comes in. Is that right?
Yes, this is basically like this is where you identify. So if we'll take this like handle new ink one, here we're saying this is a function which is to handle new ink, and like it takes an input, which is the event, the sort of new ink event, which is on the new ink event is just defined in the contract, in the Nifty Ink contract.
Do we pull the contract up here?
I don't
know.
No,
we don't have the contracts. We don't have the contracts. I have to go find them somewhere else. They'll have to trust us on that one.
I could put that in there actually, but anyway. But yeah, so then if you
here, right? Should we look?
Yes.
Should we explain what's going on here? Because I don't really know what's going on. I'm guessing this is triggered each time one of these new events comes in, and this lets you basically mappings. You're mapping some of the information from the event into that schema, I'm guessing, or into what those objects in the schema look like. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty much. So in terms of what's happening here, like the way the graph works, until someone tells me otherwise, you basically can load, like in a handler, you can load instances, and you can then save those instances. So what we've done here, like at the start, is we've like got this artist. So like I'm going to say, okay, I've got this event with a new ink, and one of the parameters is the artist address. So I'm going to try and load an artist with that unique identifier.
Ah, okay. Okay, so artist is within our schema, and now we're loading that up given some address. So this artist is kind of like an object that matches our schema. But if it's not, if it's not set, then you're going to create a new artist. I got it. Yeah. So it's like doing memory allocation too.
Yeah. And so, so we check if we've seen this artist before. If we haven't, we create a new one. If we have seen it before, we just like increase the number of inks that they've made.
Okay.
And then like the ink, we do a similar thing. We shouldn't have seen an ink before because we only see this once per ink. So maybe that's like overcautious, but basically like we then take the parameters from our new ink event, and then we save that ink and we save the artist to the schema. And so that handler like end to end will then essentially update our
and it looks like you've got a global ink count. This is increment total.
Yes. This
is that in our schema?
No, so this is in the mapping file. There's another function.
There we go. Cool.
This is saying, okay, I'd like to count the number of inks every day. And so I do a similar thing here where essentially I like make it super easy just to like add a number. And so, I mean, the documentation is great in terms of like on
where'd you learn this stuff? Just the Graph website? Yeah, like where's the good place to learn more about this?
Yes, I think if you go there's a link I think in it to
Oh, of course. There's an article, right? Let's go grab that article again.
The documentation, that guy. Just in the middle of the page.
Oh, here.
Yeah, that guy.
Oh, now I've done it. Here we go. There we go. Okay, cool. This is a good place to go for reference, and this is where you learned all this stuff.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah,
cool.
This takes a bit of getting your head around, but and there's more richness certainly than like in terms of pulling stuff from IPFS, which we've experimented with. But like broadly speaking, you see an event, you fetch objects, you save objects, and that's about it.
It's a lot more intuitive than listening for all those events and then coming up with your own mechanism to parse through them and query out the stuff that you need. Like this, it's a very needed thing. Okay, so we've got our ABI, we've got our schema that tells us kind of what our objects look like and how they're linked. We've got our mapping that basically handles each new event and populates those objects. Then we've got this subgraph.yaml file, which looks kind of like, yep, there's going to be our address. This looks like kind of a manifest of what contract to go talk to, maybe.
Yes, this is where you kind of tie it all together, where you say, okay, this isn't like you basically define your data sources, you define your schema up top, and then you define your mapping. So that's where you're essentially saying where the ABI is that you need to reference. But the key thing here, I guess, is the event handlers. So here we're handling the like new ink event. So and the handler we're using is the handle new ink from that mapping file. So really, yeah, you're just pointing to all these different things. Like we've got obviously a pretty vanilla thing where we've got like one subgraph, like one like schema, we've got one mapping file, we've got like one ABI. So it's all pretty simple like right now, but you get the idea. You could layer on stuff here. And like one thing I was even thinking about is like, if we roll out Nifty Ink or like new Nifty Ink contracts, you could actually combine them all into one subgraph. So like from a perspective, actually, like you could just sort of hide that contract abstraction rather than like having different UIs or whatever, which I think
they
might
could be
really
minting on either one, and it would be incrementing that global value, or all the models would all be kind of merged together, and that gives us like more flexibility around like upgrading those contracts or something like that.
Yeah,
hopefully we don't have to do that too much.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we've got our kind of manifest. So then we need a yarn build. I think that's up in the main folder, right?
Wait, no, not
no. That would be a build of the static.
Yeah.
I think we do a yarn build here, right in the subgraph. Yep.
In the subgraph, yeah. That's the one. So you can see what's happening. Like, it's basically compiled, and you've got your build file, and then there's two things, basically.
Ooh, what should I be doing? Sorry, I'm kind of just
yeah. So then you're pretty much good to go. You've got the stuff you need to deploy on your local graph node. So you've just got these two. So create local is basically telling the graph node that this exists. Yeah, so you created that little subgraph.
And again, we're running these within that subgraph folder. You'll do a lot of yarn commands up at the top when you're doing Scaffold-ETH stuff, but these yarn commands are specifically inside of this subgraph folder.
Yeah. And so now you can see we basically saved these files to our local IPFS node, and you can see actually now behind your terminals now getting going in the background there. So you can see
it's parsing blocks, right? It's going to that start block that we specified in that manifest. So it's going to the address at that start block, and it's working through all the events, basically packaging up all this data into something that now we can query from. Is that right?
Yeah, and you can see that like some blocks have got nothing to them, but then you can see somewhere where like we're basically passing this event, right? You can see handle new ink, we're passing it and just adding and adding and adding.
Cool. Let's see. Can I see more? Oh yeah, one trigger found at the block hash, the block number. Okay, cool. So and what's the range there? So it's doing thousands at a time. It's doing a couple thousand at a time. So basically when it ticks by and there's nothing there, that's 1,000 blocks where no one made an ink. But then some of these, it's going to find these. Okay, cool. Well, look at all this activity. Look at all these beauties getting created. Okay, so now it's deployed. It's running, right? I did the deploy. So so basically, if you're doing Scaffold-ETH, you'll have your development server, you'll have your chain, you'll have your deploy terminal, and you'll have a fourth graph terminal if you have all of those up at once. But for us, we're just doing kind of just front end here. We're not writing any contracts, so we just have just our app and our, what's it called, graph node?
Yeah, the graph node running.
Cool. Yeah. Now it's time to access our subgraph.
Yeah, so now if you reload this page, I've not got this point.
Number go up.
Yeah, so that was, I guess that was when we first released. Anyway, yeah, so in terms of what's going on here, like
200, what is that? There were 200 graphs made on Saturday? Sorry, I
200
keep interrupting you.
no worries. 200 inks on Saturday, September 5th, I
Neat.
guess.
It's a big
So,
day.
yeah, so if you reloaded it, I've not got this polling actually, so you could set it up to make it poll. So you can see it's just like iterating through time.
Okay. Okay. Number went down. Number went down.
Yeah,
What happened on September 5th? Something. But we would have never known that without the graph.
yeah, exactly.
Or it would have been a lot harder to find. Okay, cool. So what we have here is basically a demonstration of how to build a front end that talks to our own graph node that's talking to our contract that's already deployed live. Could you give us just like what's the, once we play around with this and we get an understanding of, okay, I get it. I want to go back to this stuff so I can go through all of it. I've got my ABI in there. I've got my schema set up. I've got the mappings handling things. And then I've got the subgraph pointed at my current contract. I've got the manifest ready to go. Once I figure all this stuff out and I get it to work as an example, how do I then take a fresh Scaffold-ETH where I've got your contract and start pulling those events from your contract, just from like a master branch? I think that might be the next step here, is maybe we'll make a master clone of, maybe we'll just build the graph right into Scaffold-ETH, right? But for now, if I have my your contract, how do I experiment with sending events to this? Like what's the process from a fresh clone of Scaffold-ETH?
Yeah, so I guess you kind of do the same steps. So you'd go and grab your ABI, like first up, you grab your ABI, you drop it in, you probably, then think about,
and that's in the artifacts folder, by the way, right? If you would go to packages and you would go to Biddler, and then in here will be an artifacts folder. Ooh, this is a good, we were doing open earlier. Watch this, you do, whoops. So you would do open, and then you would go packages, Biddler, and then there would be an artifacts folder here, but there isn't one right now because I haven't compiled. But if you go into the artifacts, your ABI will be there. Okay, sorry to go on a side quest there. So you've got your ABI, you plug that in here. Okay. Then
and then it, like, it's pretty much about like what you want to, like, I guess the simplest, like the really simplest way you could kind of see this would be to like basically mimic the events that you saw, like that you're like throwing off, just to get used to it. So like in that case, your schema would be pretty simple. It'd just be like maybe like purposes, but actually, and then you'd basically like have a bunch of purposes, like for each a bunch of purposes, which you could then like fetch purposes and see them over time. And so you'd like have a pretty simple schema. It'd probably be just that one thing. And then your mapping would basically just be, when you see that event, you just save that as a purpose.
So we'd have something like type as purpose over here, right? I don't think I'm going to get it all in a couple minutes, but you would have a purpose, and it would just be probably who is setting it, maybe.
Yeah. So you always need an ID.
Oh, okay. Oh, ID is something they're tracking. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that the ID always needs to be a string. But then, if you go to the purpose,
maybe something like that.
Yeah. And maybe you could do like create like timestamp or created at or whatever. And
okay.
And have that as a big int. So big int.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's the one. And yeah, so the exclamation point here means that it's required. So you need to have one on every single one. And so then you'd basically go to your mapping file probably, and here you'd basically create a handle new purpose or whatever. And your event.
Where does handle new ink get? Oh, I get it. I bet it gets plugged in here.
Yes,
handle new ink. Yep, got it. Okay, cool. So you would create your handler and your mapping TS that says, this event is going to come in, and we can see from the contract that the event is simply a sender and a purpose, right? In this case, and we would get in there and say, set the dot sender. We'd probably make a new purpose if it didn't exist already. Probably.
So I think you probably you probably want to track every single one. Like every single one is a different one. So maybe the ID would be like the block number or something like that. And so then they'd always be unique. So you could just like create a new one, and then you just save that, and then you'd be able to see that over time.
And technically someone could set the purpose twice in the same block. So that might not, something similar to that. You create your own unique identifier and start stacking them up here in this mapping. And then finally we plug it all together with this subgraph, right? We would point, where do I point? Ooh, it's somewhere else. Where do I point it at localhost again?
Yeah, so you point it, well, you need to, if you go back to the graph node, so up here, you can see
There
like we've got xDie, so you maybe want to change that to like local.
I'd kill this and I'd point this.
So actually, yeah, this is one thing that's a bit funky. If you go to the README, there's a specific thing. If you go up to the Docker bit, so I think I say, yeah, like if you want to run, yeah, that's what you want to use to look at a local chain running 858545.
I'm glad we did this. That's a good little gotcha. Thanks for documenting that too. And this could be local host or something like that. So this is going to talk to, oh, I see, because there's Docker is creating a local DNS entry and this makes it.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. And blah, 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 blah. Oh, so it's just using Postgres under the hood.
Yeah.
In the long run, it's always just a database you're talking to. Okay, cool. And awesome. Okay, so you would point this at localhost. You would get your ABI in here. You would wire up your schema here. You would set your handlers to handle each one and instantiate the memory as new events come in. And then you'd use this manifest you would have to plug in. So this would be a little tricky because if you're redeploying your contract all the time, it'd be a new contract address every time in your artifacts. You'd almost want to have some kind of like little script that plugs your latest address in here. But later on, this is just how we would get it to work. But you would plug your address in here. Start block would probably just be 1. And it would probably start giving you some information in the front end based on your events, right?
Yeah. So then, like the simplest one that you could have here would be to just list all the purposes, just like the current sort of master branch, but it would just be like a bit more, well, then maybe you could track the number of new purposes in a day, or you could like get all the purposes that contain a certain string and all this kind of stuff.
What does the data look like over here in the front end? Can we console log something or even inspect it over here?
So if you go back to the Docker thing and start it up, but you'll need to
Docker's not running, right?
But wait, don't start it.
Okay. Oh, right, because we have it on localhost.
Yeah. Or not, yeah, so this guy. Yeah.
I think I got everything rolled back, maybe. Let's see.
Yeah, we do.
Oh, does it fire up an IPFS node also?
Yeah,
it looks like there's a local IPFS node.
Local mode. So maybe go refresh the app and see what you see. It might be having a bad time. Oh no, you're okay. So if you go to the GraphQL tab.
There. Yep. Oh, so here we go.
This is basically, so now you can explore the schema here on the right. So like, so I've written like, here's an example query, kind of what it looks like. This is basically getting the first, like, this is the most recently created ink. And so if you go to, yeah, I guess, well, maybe
No, this is good. So you could do, okay, so we could look at our schema and figure out all sorts of different queries we could make here.
Yeah, so back in the GraphQL tab, there's like on the right, if you click on there's a document, the Explorer, so if you click query, there, so then this gives you the schema. Wow. How you,
neat.
So it's all pretty.
So I could like query by how many times how many inks I have or something like that. And to do that on chain, you would have to read all the events and figure out how many of them there are for that user, and then display it. You wouldn't be able to display that number until you parse through all those events. And this thing has already parsed through all those events, and you just ask it for the number and display it. So your front is much poppier, and the development experience is a lot easier because you're just asking for the things you need, not building a data parser like I always find myself doing with events. Awesome. Okay. Any closing thoughts on this? Great work on this, Adam. This is awesome. And I think we might want to add a little bit more to Scaffold-ETH. This is probably just going to have to be part of it, I think, but that'll require people to have a Docker container. We'll see.
Yeah, although, well, I mean, Docker install, it's a lot of memory, but once you've got it up and running, it's actually pretty smooth. Yeah, I'd say, like I said, yeah, I wish we'd done this with Nifty Ink to start with, maybe, like, because
we had to get it out the door, though. We were forcing ourselves to ship, right? Like, kind of the way we ship things so quickly. You have to cut the right corners and kind of say, yeah, this will be a mess for now, but we'll improve this when we get a second iteration. And you guys have kind of done that second iteration now and put the graph in here.
Yeah, and it's honestly, like, now just stuff which would have been like unthinkable from a, like, how do we get this information on the graph? Like, even like, okay, if we want to have something that's more like a shop view, like what inks are for sale and for how much and all this kind of stuff and rankings and this kind of stuff.
We didn't even know how users would use it, right? Like a lot of being able to ship early and see how people use it gives you a lot of feedback. And maybe we didn't even need that information. Maybe we needed something completely different, and we kind of discover those things as we go.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, man. Happy Bowtie Friday. Thanks for building this out. I'm gonna put this up on YouTube.
Nice.
All right. Happy Bowtie Friday.